Good morning, everyone here. So good to have you here, and all of you watching on Facebook and YouTube. This is our Girlfriends Bible Study, the first Sunday of each month, and we're glad you joined us. We have some special guests here. I just want to mention Marky Gilbert, who was a part of our Faith Ministries church in Greeley, Colorado, 40 years ago. And she and her husband were home group leaders. And we just connected again recently. And she lives in the area. So it's amazing, really is. So that's so fun. And I wanted to mention a special mention to Charlotte, who is here for the first time, because she and her husband blessed me with the gift of air conditioning for my home, in which I've lived 30 years without. And it is such an amazing blessing. Thank you again, Charlotte and Mark. Okay, couple things about Faith Ministries. We have youth camp coming up, and it is July 17 to 21, Bear Trap Ranch above Colorado Springs, above the Broadmoor, for those young people 12 to 18 years of age. And then the young people are taught how to lead and help lead the camp, how to flow in the gifts of the Spirit. They're taught all these kinds of things so that they can continue on once older people can't do it anymore. Like my husband, he checked out, he went to heaven. And so 8 years later, we're still going. And youth camp is going strong. Any youth that, I have flyers here, and you can ask us for flyers. And then I have a newsletter that goes out every month under Dwell Ministries. And also, my friend Claudia and I have started a podcast called Wit and Wisdom. And that comes out once a week on Tuesday morning. And we just share for maybe 10 to 12 minutes on subjects that we like to talk about, like raising children or women in ministry or whatever we decide on. It's a really fun podcast. And now I would like to, plus on the 17th, we have our Faith Ministries Church, Denver in Lakewood, at using the facilities of Westwood, 6 p.m. a Saturday night, the 17th, and Julie and Geary, her husband, will be ministering. And now I have the privilege of introducing my oldest daughter, Tamara Lynn Thompson. And do you know, I want you to know how I got her name. When I was 12 years old in a Plymouth Brethren Sunday school in Chicago, my Sunday school teacher, or one of them, maybe they were the youth leaders, but whatever, they had a baby, and they named their baby Tamara Lynn. And I thought to myself, someday I will have a little girl and name her Tamara Lynn. And do you know what else? Their last name was Thompson. So here is the second Tamara Lynn Thompson. It's sort of amazing, isn't it? Yeah. But Tamara lives in Greeley, Colorado. She has two wonderful children, young adults, Connor, Savannah. Savannah's married to Daniel, and they live in Arkansas. Connor has a wonderful girlfriend. And then Tamara has 3 stepsons and grandchildren and great-grandchildren. So I have great-great-grandchildren because of that. And anyway, it's a wonderful blended family. And Tamara is very wise. And I love you, Tamara.
Love you too, Mom.
She's a great teacher.
All right, now I'll get this thing back. I forgot to get my mom a microphone, so we were sharing. All right. Well, today I am talking about even if. And where that came from is, you can't hear me?
Sorry, I didn't hear. We're talking about
even if.
Even if.
Yes, even if. But then I went through, and so many of the verses are even if, even though, even when. So I started looking at some of this. Even if is imaginary or hypothetical. Even if it rains tomorrow, I'm still going to go hiking. So you're saying, I don't know if it's going to rain. It's not real. It's you're speculating. It may or may not happen. Even though is a real situation. I'm going out even though it's raining. So even though is things that really happen. Even though, and then even when I'm doing this, it's another thing that's real, even when. And it was interesting that in Psalms 23, I went to several different translations and it used all three of those for different translations. So even if I go through the deepest darkness, I will not be afraid, Lord, for you are with me. So that's speculating. Even if that someday will happen to me, I will not be afraid. Then it says, even though I walk through the sunless valley of death, I fear no evil, for you are with me. That's saying we probably will do that. It's even though we go through hard times, it says in this world you'll have tribulation, but be of good cheer. And he says, do not fear. And then another version says, even when your path takes me through the valley of deepest darkness, fear will never conquer me, for you already have. So I'm just going to look at a story that has an even if in it, and just how God, as I've looked at even ifs, even whens, the even ifs, even if we speculate, even if we think, even when, it always, most every verse I found says, I will not fear. I will not be afraid. Even if this happens, I won't be afraid. And so it's amazing that God says, you may go through something like this, but even if you do, I'm with you. I will be with you. So how many of you know the story of Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah? Who's heard of them? Okay, now if I add Daniel to it, would you know who it is? It's Daniel, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. So I'm going to read the story and then talk about these men. So it says in Daniel 1, it says, in the 3rd year of the reign of Jehoiakim, king of Judah, this was about 600 years before Jesus came, Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, came to Jerusalem and besieged it. Now, besieging means they took it over, and they sometimes let the king reign. But then these places had to pay heavy tribute to whoever was in charge of them. So they may not have come in and taken the king away. They may have let the king stay, but they say, in order for you to stay, you're going to have to pay us this. So they besieged Jerusalem. And the Lord delivered Jehoiakim, king of Judah, into his hand, along with some of the articles from the temple of God. Then he carried off to the temple of his God in Babylonia and put in the treasure house of his God. Babylonia was ancient Shinar, known for their wicked worship of false gods, the place where the Tower of Babel was built after the flood, now modern-day Iraq and some 900 miles from Jerusalem. Now Jehoiakim was made king by a pharaoh when they were under the rule of Egypt. He was the oldest son of Josiah. Josiah was a godly king, whereas Jehoiakim, he even passed over his oldest son and gave it to his middle son, but he didn't last in the reign very long. Then they put him in charge, but he was wicked and a godless tyrant who committed atrocious sins and crimes, known for incest, murdering men, taking their wives and property. So when they took him over, he was paying heavy tribute to the Egyptians. Then he changed, forcefully of course, and had allegiance to Nebuchadnezzar. So besides goods, he was also forced to hand over some of the royal young men. And family and nobility, they were given as hostages to the king, and of which Daniel and his friends were a part. And when they were given over, they could have been 14 and 15 years old. They were taken from their homes, raised in nobility and royalty, and they were taken and and the king probably said, oh, here, take him and take him and take him, because he was a wicked king. So here we go. Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah, along with Daniel, were a part of the young men who were sent to Babylon. So the 900-mile trip back then probably took 4 to 5 months. I can't imagine as a 15-year-old being taken captive and going to a different country and hearing about Babylonia and hearing that it doesn't line up with what we believe as from the tribe of Judah. They were all from the tribe of Judah and from the area of Judah. But it says, then they got there, and the king ordered Ashpenaz, chief of the court officials, to bring into the king's service some of the Israelites from the royal family and nobility, young men without any physical defect, handsome, showing aptitude for every kind of learning, well-informed, quick to understand, and qualified to serve in the king's palace. He was to teach them, actually, they were indoctrinated in fortune-telling and magic and the language and literature of the Babylonians. The king assigned them a daily amount of food and wine from the king's table. They were to be trained, intensely indoctrinated for 3 years. So you're taking these young boys at 15 and you're going to indoctrinate them for 3 years. And after that, they would enter into the king's service. Among those who were chosen from Judah were Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. The chief official gave them new names. To Daniel, the name Belteshazzar; to Hananiah, Shadrach; to Mishael, Meshach; and to Azariah, Abednego. But Daniel resolved not to defile himself with the royal food and wine, and he asked the chief official for permission not to defile himself in this way. Notice he didn't go on a hunger strike. He and the 3 boys didn't say, well, we're not going to eat that food. That food is defiled. You gave it to idols. We're not going to do that. Instead, he made a proposal, which shows he was very wise. Because rather than causing trouble, he said, hey, how about this? And it says, now God caused the official to show favor and compassion to Daniel, but the official told Daniel, but I'm so afraid of my lord the king, who has assigned your food and drink to you. Why should he see you looking worse than the other young men your age? The king will have my head because of you. So he didn't want to do it. But then Daniel said to the guard, who the chief official had appointed over Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah, please test your servants for 10 days. Give us nothing but vegetables to eat and water to drink. Then compare our appearance with that of the young men who eat the royal food, and treat your servants in accordance with what you see. So he agreed to this and tested them for 10 days. At the end of the 10 days, they looked healthier and better nourished than any of the other young men who ate the royal food. So the guard took away their choice food and wine they were to drink and gave them vegetables instead. To these 4 young men, God gave knowledge and understanding of all kinds of literature and learning, and Daniel could understand visions and dreams of all kinds. At the end of the time set by the king to bring them into his service, the chief official presented them to Nebuchadnezzar. The king talked with them, and he found none equal to these 4 men. So they entered into the king's service. In every matter of wisdom and understanding about which the king questioned them, he found them 10 times better than all the magicians and enchanters in the whole kingdom. So that's amazing that God blessed these 4 men, 4 young men. By this time, they're probably 19 when they went into the king's service, and yet the king found them wiser than anyone else in the palace. So let's look at their names, because the first thing that they did was attempt to change their identity by changing their names. So can you imagine that you have names that are named after God? You have God in your name. So to Daniel, which is El is my judge, and he came from the God word Elohim. El is my judge, that's what Daniel meant, the El on the end of Dan. To Belteshazzar, Bel is my protector. To Hananiah, his name meant Yahweh has been gracious, grace and mercy, and he was changed to Shadrach under the command of Aku, the moon god. Mishael, who is what El is, changed to who is what Akko is. So Mishael became Meshach. Azariah, Yah has helped, from Yahweh. He was changed to Abednego. I'm a slave of the god Nebu. So Daniel and Mishael's name ended in El, referring to Elohim, the Hebrew word for God, the one true God, the mighty one, the supreme one. In the end, Elohim created the heavens, and in the beginning, Elohim created the heavens and the earth. Hananiah and Azariah carried the suffix Ayah or Yah, which is short for Yahweh, the covenant name of God. So their identity, they knew they had God in their names. They knew who God was, but yet they were in a place where they were going to change their identity. We want you, we're going to indoctrinate you, you're going to forget who you are. And when we call you Shadrach, you're going to forget that you ever had the name of your God in your name. So I was thinking about how many of us have been given other names when we grew up unintentionally, but maybe a father said, you'll never amount to anything, and that came in your heart, and you grew up thinking, I'll never amount to anything, and so you didn't go by your name, you were given a name that was not who you were. And so you grew up thinking, oh, I'm stupid, my mom always told me I was stupid, or my dad always said this, and it changed who we were. It changed our identity. It changed who God said we were. We were named with these names. And then if you grow up thinking you'll never amount to anything, oh, little never amount to anything, and that gets in your heart, and you grow up and you follow your name, and you end up not amounting to much. So I thought that was just very interesting. Whereas these young men, I know that because they were so wise, they probably encouraged each other. Hey, remember your name. Yeah. Remember what God says you are. Who are you? We're reminding each other, hey, they probably called each other, hey, Azariah, remember who you are. Hey, Daniel, remember who you are. And they didn't let anything that any of the doctrination, but yet God gave them wisdom, even though they were being indoctrinated. He probably gave them with brilliant ideas. Let's think of it this way. Let's think of it that way. So anyway, these names were given. Is God in any of these things? How many can still hear those words spoken of over you? This wasn't spoken over me, but I remember when I was little, and people have heard this story, but when I was little, third grade, we lived out in the country, and some men tried to break in our house one night, and Mom went to call her uncle who was across the street, and he didn't, just a dirt road, south of Kersey, way out in the middle of nowhere, and the phone was dead. And the dogs barking, you can hear them. Yeah. And my dad was not there. So Mom woke me up because I was the oldest, probably third grade. And at one point, I had to crawl in the kitchen and crawl around the edges and reach up and get knives out just in case they got in.
In a bottle.
In a bottle. So
For weapons.
Anyway, after a while, we finally fell asleep. They weren't able to get in. And Mom said, okay, Tamara, wake up. They're gone. They're gone. What I want you to do is run across and tell Herb what's been happening, Uncle Herb. Let him know what's happening over here because they just drove away. So it's like, okay. So I'm halfway out the window and we hear the car coming back. So we shut the window, shut the drapes or whatever, and we were peeking out, and it goes by really slow with no lights on this dirt road, this car. And so Mom said, okay, go now. And I can't do it. So she did. She jumped out, ran across the street, and with your one light there over the cow pens, middle of the night, so I'm watching out the window, and as she's running across the street, I see the lights come on in the car over this direction, and it comes flying around with lights on into my uncle's yard, and I see her go up the porch, but I can't see the porch. And then I see people get out of the car and go up to the porch, and then I see them come back down, and I thought they'd kidnapped my mom. So I wake up Julie and I said, Mom's been kidnapped. And Julie was like, she rolled her eyes and I think probably fell back asleep. First grade. Yeah, why wouldn't you? So I sat there for like half an hour because she couldn't come back, because then my uncle went out and talked to these men. And a spirit of fear came in me then. I think I was very outgoing, smiled a lot. I became very inward, very shy, and we didn't know it was a spirit of fear that had latched on to me. And so I even remember it stayed with me through college. And I went to college, and I even remember, this is funny, I took a sign language class, and at the end we had to sign a song or something, and I was still very shy and very nervous. And I got done signing my song, and my teacher was hilarious, but he starts clapping his hand and he goes, oh my gosh, that's the first time I've seen someone sign in vibrato, because I was shaking so bad. So anyway, he thought it was awesome that I signed in vibrato, but I still didn't realize, and I think I knew God and started understanding the Word of God and standing against that fear. And then years later, my husband, who would be my husband, came into my life, and that spirit of fear rose up its head again and really grabbed hold of me. And it took me 7 years to marry my husband. I would say, it was like I never moved for 7 years. I would step across and say, yes, I'll marry you. No, I can't. Yes, I'll break up with you. No, I can't. And I just felt like I couldn't move. And so one night Mom was here, and I walked in and I said, this fear has to be broken off me or I can't live. I'm tired of standing in the same place every day. And I felt that spirit of fear. They prayed for me. I felt it leave. It was so freeing to see that fear lift off me when I'd lived under it on and off for so many years. And I got engaged the next day. And then somebody said something to me, and I could feel the fear come. And I said, at least I'm walking. For the first time, I've crossed the line and I'm walking. Now, if God wants to change my heart to not marry him, then at least I'm walking. And that was the end of January, and we got married April 2nd. So I think some of the fear things was he had 3 boys. He'd been divorced. And so it was a lot to think about. These 3 boys, there was a lot going on with them. But it ended up being what God had planned for my life. He directed my life that way. And I have 7 grandchildren and 6 grandchildren, 6 greats. So anyway, they're really awesome. But anyway,
Tell me when you called me about what you done.
Oh, 8 months, probably 8 months in, April, Christmas. Something happened at Christmas. I called my mom and I said, I have married a soap opera. And she said back to me, no, you married a mission field. So it changed my whole attitude about what I had married, rather than seeing it as a soap opera, seeing it as an opportunity, seeing it as a place of ministry and a place of loving people. And
You made a huge.
so, yeah, we've been married 29 years, going on 30. So anyway, let's go back to that name. So fear came in my heart, and I always was fearful and shy. And the Bible says that mankind was made in God's image. This means that we are designed to function and exist in his identity. Since God is love, our life is directly connected to knowing and believing in the love that God has for us. Since God is peace, we can walk in peace that passes all understanding, letting it guard our hearts and our minds. Since God is joy, I walk in his joy. The joy of the Lord is my strength. I am who you say I am. I am chosen, redeemed, forgiven, righteous, adopted. So can you imagine these four young men encouraging each other, reminding them of who God called them? So I was thinking, and Charlotte, your name came up. So I just thought, I wonder what Charlotte's name means while I was doing this. And it means free man. Free man.
Oh, I never heard that one. I've heard a lot of different ones.
Yes. And so I thought, he who the Son sets free is free indeed. And so then I got Proverbs 1. But the one who listens to me, this is for you, will live undisturbed in a heavenly peace, free from fear, confident and courageous. This one will rest unafraid and sheltered from the storms of life, because you are a free man. And I thought that was very interesting that that's what it meant. And just look at your names, and even if, like my daughter, I named her Savannah, and now she gets it. But back then she said, why would you name me From the Treeless Plain? What does that even mean? From the Treeless Plain. So Savannah. And then a lady came up to her one time and said, that's where the lionesses live. And so she said, you're a lioness. And I thought, well, that's really cool. And my name means palm tree. Tamara is a palm tree. Lynn is a pool by a waterfall. So my verse has been, so you grab onto a verse and tell yourselves every day, this is who I am. This is what God says I am. I am this. And in Psalms 1, my name, this is what I took. But his pleasure and passion is remaining true to the word of I am, meditating day and night in the true revelation of light. He will be standing firm like a flourishing tree planted by God's design, deeply rooted by the brooks of bliss, bearing fruit in every season of his life. He is never dry, never fainting, ever blessed, ever prosperous. So that's what I say. I am planted here by God's design. I'm planted on this earth by God's design. And so I'm going to walk in what he says I am, and I'm not walk in fear. Where fear was my name, I said, no, fear's no longer going to be my name. And with Daniel, after they had come through this and he saw them to be so brave and so wise, it says, then the king placed Daniel, still called him Daniel. Isn't that interesting? The others he called their other names, but in a high position, and lavished many gifts on him. He made him ruler over the entire province of Babylon and placed him in charge of all its wise men. Moreover, at Daniel's request, the king appointed Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego administrators over the province of Babylon, while Daniel himself remained in the royal court. Administrators? Yes. So they were administrators over all over all these different areas. The king must have, like I just said, the king must have had a very high regard for Daniel, because he called him Daniel. He'd asked Daniel to come in. It doesn't say he ever said, Belteshazzar, I want you to be here. He called him Daniel. So as we go along, and they've been there a while, and then the king gets this great idea, I'm going to make this huge image, and I'm going to have everybody bow down to it. So, where do you think that came from? Yeah. So he made an image of gold 60 cubits high and 6 cubits wide. I don't know how much a cubit is, so I don't know how big that would be. And set it up in the plain of Dura in the province of Babylon. He then summoned the satraps, prefects, governors, advisors, treasurers, judges, magistrates, and all the other provincial officials to come to the dedication of this image he had set up. And then it goes through all the names again. So they all assembled for the dedication image that King Nebuchadnezzar had set up, and they stood before it. Then a herald loudly proclaimed, nations and peoples of every language, this is what you are commanded to do. As soon as you hear the sound of the horn, flute, zither, whatever that is, lyre, harp, pipe, and all kinds of music, you must fall down and worship the image of God that King Nebuchadnezzar has set up. Whoever does not fall down and worship will be immediately thrown into a blazing furnace. Therefore, as soon as they heard the sound, and then it goes through all the music instruments again, they fell down and worshipped the image of gold that King Nebuchadnezzar had set up. At the same time, some astrologers came forward and said, "Hey, may the king live forever. You issued a decree that when we hear this music, that we bow down. However, there are some Jews that are in charge, and they're not doing what you said. They're not paying attention to you, your majesty. They neither serve your gods nor worship the image of gold you have set up." So that shows that even after, this could have been years later, it shows that they remained true to God and true to what they believed in and didn't allow themselves to be indoctrinated, which is really amazing. And we live in a time where, man, they're trying to indoctrinate us with everything. It's, yeah, so much stuff coming in. And we have to stand up. Nope, that's not what I... Yes, trying to go after our children. But they said, these men won't pay attention to you. And Daniel wasn't here. He's talking just about Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. Furious with rage, he summoned them. So these men were brought before the king, and he said to them, "Is it true that you do not serve my gods or worship the image I have set down? Now when you hear this music, I command you to fall down and worship it. But if you do not, I'm gonna throw you in the blazing furnace." So they replied to him, "King Nebuchadnezzar, we do not need to defend ourselves before you in this matter." Can you imagine saying that to the king? So here it is. Here's the even if. They were predicting an unavoidable situation. Even if we are thrown into the blazing fire, the God we serve is able to deliver us from it, and he will deliver us from your majesty's hand. But even if he does not, we want you to know, your majesty, that we will not serve your gods or worship the image of gold you have set up. So I can't imagine standing before a fire and saying, guess what? We're not going to do it. We don't even have to defend ourselves in front of you. We know who we serve. He was so furious that his attitude changed toward them. So they went from favored to unfavored, just like that. He ordered the furnace heated 7 times hotter than usual and commanded some of the strongest soldiers in his army to tie them up and throw them into the blazing furnace. So these men, wearing their robes, trousers, turbans, and other clothes, were bound and thrown into the blazing furnace. The king's command was so urgent and the furnace so hot that the flames of the fire killed the soldiers who took up these men, and these 3 men, firmly tied, fell into the blazing furnace. Then King Nebuchadnezzar leaped to his feet in amazement and asked his advisors, "Weren't there 3 men that were tied up and threw into the fire?" They replied, "Certainly, your majesty." He said, "Look, I see 4 men walking around in the fire, unbound and unharmed, and the 4th looks like the son of the gods." Nebuchadnezzar then approached the opening of the blazing furnace and shouted, "Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, servants of the highest God, come out, come here." So they walked out. I love that. So they came out of the fire, and all the prefects and governors and royal advisors crowded around them. They saw that the fire had not harmed their bodies, nor was a hair of their head singed. Their robes were not scorched, and there was no smell of fire on them. Then Nebuchadnezzar said, "Praise be to the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, who has sent his angel and rescued his servants. They trusted in him and defied the king's command and were willing to give up their lives rather than serve or worship any god except their own God." That's pretty amazing that he said, wow. And remember, they had been in his favor. He hadn't found anyone as smart as these 4 men. There's nobody, and put him over all these areas. So for him to be so furious at them that they went from favored to unfavored, but God was with them. He said, "Therefore I decree that any nation or language who say anything against the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego will be cut into pieces, and their houses be turned into piles of rubble, for no other God can save in this way." Then the king promoted these men in the province of Babylon. So look at what they did. They stood firm. Even if you throw us in, we know God will take care of us. But even if he doesn't, God is with us. We're not going to defy what God, they knew who they were. They were so strong in their identity and knowing what God said about them and knowing, but can you imagine having these names where every day you're saying Danielle, you have the name of Elohim in your name. Hananiah, you have Yahweh in your name. I serve Yahweh. So that is a great big even if. So even if we had faced things in our lives, we know God is for us. So I'm sure we all could think of times when even if or even though or even when something happened, you had the strength because God was with you and he showed you who you were and what he had called you to be. And so I'm just going to read a couple even ifs or even though. And it says in Psalm 27, Yahweh is my revelation light and the source of my salvation. I fear no one. I'll never turn back and run. For you, O Lord, surround and protect me. When the evil ones come to destroy me, they will be the ones who turn back. My heart will not fear, and I will remain confident. Even if an army rises to attack, I will not be shaken, even if war is imminent. Then Psalm 37, even in a time of disaster, he will watch over them, and they will always have more than enough, no matter what happens. I like my sister Julie. She always reminds me that God is more than enough and that he is big enough to give us more than enough. Psalm 37, when God delights in how you live your life, he establishes your every step. Even if you stumble badly, you will survive, for the Lord lifts you up with his hands. I was once inexperienced, but now I'm old. Not once have I ever found a lover of God forsaken by him, nor have any of their children gone hungry. Instead, I've found the godly ones to be generous and one who give freely to others. So I was thinking of he establishes your every step. Even if you have hard times, he lifts you up. And so this morning I was thinking about my grandson, Zephaniah. And Zephaniah was my second grandson. I had Nia's first, and then Zephaniah came along. And Zephaniah was a little inward baby. You know those babies who want to see the world? Both my children, when you held them, they wanted to look out. They wanted to see what was happening. And then there's other babies that when you get them, they just want to play with your face and they want to touch your hair and they want to, they just want to be looking at you or close to you. And Zephaniah was my little close baby. And because of things going on, his mom and dad weren't together. This was my stepson's son. And they were not together at the time. In fact, they broke up before he was even born. So there was a lot of drama going on. And I would take him and he would walk around and hold my pants. And so I just would sit him down and I'd sit him in my lap. And he'd lean against me and I would rub his back and pray over him and sing songs to him. And then he'd go. And then we had the great time, but he always wanted to be near me. So little Zephaniah, I just looked up his name today, and it's Yahweh is my secret place. The Lord has protected, treasured by God. So Zephaniah, we called him Zephan. He came one time in the middle of the night. His mom picked up and moved them to Kansas, and so I didn't see them for about a year or so. And she came back with a new boyfriend, and anyway, this new boyfriend, I just didn't get a good feeling about him. And at the time, I was thinking, we need to keep Zephaniah in my heart. We should keep Zephaniah, but I had a 2-year-old and a newborn, and we should keep him for a while. And then my husband thought we should keep Zephaniah for a while, but I can't ask my wife with a newborn, fairly newborn, to take in another for a little bit. He was 3.5. So we didn't talk about it. And they went on their way back to Dodge City. And a week later, we got a phone call that Zephaniah was gone. he had been, Zephaniah had been, this boyfriend was high on drugs. And so in order to discipline him, he hogtied him and put a sock in his mouth and put him in a sleeping bag and beat him. And he died. And so we got the news that he was gone. And just to see that it was the Lord has protected, treasured by God. I saw a picture of Jesus in the sleeping bag with him because it was just a hard thing to process. And I saw Jesus with the biggest, brightest smile on his face. And he said, Zephaniah, do you want to come live with me? And I saw him shake his head, yes, and they were gone. And I believe that before any of the really bad stuff, I believe God protected him and took him to be with him. But even though that happened, God was faithful to my grandson to be with him during that difficult time. But Jesus wasn't concerned. He wasn't afraid. The face I saw in Jesus was, hey, do you want to come live with me? Kind of like, I have a great place to take you. We're just going to go and be there. So anyway, I took care of the whole funeral. They had a thing in Kansas that if there was any kind of violence or somebody died that way, they paid for the funeral. So we had his body shipped back to Greeley, and we took care of him. And just to see all the bruises on his body, it was just so hard. And my dad was gone, so she wanted to bury him in the mountains. And so he's buried up above Estes Park, and my mom is the one who did the funeral. And it was sad, but he did a great job. But it was just great to be with these people and remember who he was and what a beautiful little boy he was. And I ended up having, because of some things, I designed his headstone. And I said, Zephaniah Quest, have fun with Jesus. We will miss your smile. And you can find that up in Estes Park, right up above. In that little, there's a funeral place there. I'm in a cemetery. So that was a big, even though I walked through the valley of the shadow of death, and he experienced death, I will fear no evil, for you are with me. And I just put here, Psalm 46, right after this. God, you're such a safe and powerful place to find refuge. You're a proven help in time of trouble, more than enough, and always available whenever I need you. So I will never fear, even if every structure of support were to crumble away. We will not fear, even when this earthquake shakes and moving mountains and casting them into the sea, for the raging war of stormy winds and crashing waves can't erode our faith in you. So, wow. Now I have to think about where I'm going to go. What time is it, Mom? Okay.
It's 2:22.
Okay.
Good.
So, we will never fear, even if I found this one. This is the one that has been really special to me. Shout in celebration, Psalm 112, to the Lord. Everyone who loves the Lord and delights in him will cherish his words and be blessed beyond expectations. Their descendants will be prosperous and influential. Every generation of the righteous will experience his favor. Great blessing fill the house of the wise, for their integrity endures forever. Even if darkness overtakes them, sunrise brilliance will come bursting through. So even if darkness overtakes them, sunrise brilliance will come bursting through. Life is good for the one who's generous and charitable, conducting their affairs with honesty and truth. Their circumstances will never shake them, and others will never forget their example. They will not live in fear or dread of what may come, for their hearts are firm, ever secure in their faith. Steady and strong, they will not be afraid, but will calmly face their every foe and watch them go down in defeat. And sometimes we get sick and sometimes things happen, but life is good. And I've had cancer 3 times. And even though I will not live in fear, I refuse to live in fear of dread of what may come, because my heart is firm. Steady and strong, I will not be afraid, but will calmly face my every foe until they go down in defeat. And today I'm cancer-free after 3 times, but along the way I've asked God to direct my path. What should I do? When I first found out, I did a natural way for a while, and then realized that it was time to go get a surgery. And so I had the surgery, and I said, God, what do I do? And he said, you get the surgery, the mastectomy, but no chemo and no radiation. So I said, okay, that's what I'm going to do. And then I went on a few more years, and a little mole formed and got that taken care of. Still no chemo, no radiation. And then they found a little bit more cancer, and I said, God, what do I do? And I heard him say, do radiation this time. And he walked me through that all the way and was with me every step of the way. And at first I was very fearful, because you hear cancer and you think, will I be here for my kids? You just go through all those thoughts. But the last time, it's like, I am not afraid. This is so wild. I am not afraid at all. And so if anybody's facing anything like a physical challenge, I know you, Marky, you are, but how wonderful to know that we don't have to be afraid, for God is with us, and he's the one who holds us up and makes us strong. And I have a lot of other even ifs, but I just feel like I just wanted to open it up. If anybody else has had an even if where God brought you through and it's really a miracle story, we certainly could share that right now. But I think we have to, yeah. So we could wait for that until we're done here, and then afterwards go with that. And 2 Corinthians 5:1 says, so we are convinced that even if these bodies we live in are folded up at death like tents, we will still have a God-built home that no human hands have built, which will last forever in the heavenly realm. So we don't even have to be afraid of death, because even if our bodies fold up at one time, boy, what fun for us that we get to go be with Jesus. Psalm 4:8, and this is what I'm going to end with. It says, because of you, Lord, I will lie down in peace, and sleep comes at once, for no matter what happens, I will live unafraid. So just encourage us to be like those Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah, and Daniel, who refused to live unafraid, refused to be indoctrinated, refused to live like the Babylonians. And God blessed them, and he was with them. And we can do that too, because of God who lives. I am strong. I am brave. God is on my side. Of whom shall I fear? No matter what happens, God is with me.